The cold marble floor of the bridal suite offered no comfort, but I did not need comfort. I needed absolute focus. Tomorrow was my wedding day, a milestone most women spend decades dreaming about. For me, it was merely the final stage of a carefully orchestrated corporate execution. My name is Nia, and for 32 years I survived the psychological warfare of the Washington family. My father, Desmond, was a powerful state senator, currently leveraging every corrupt connection he possessed to launch a highly publicized campaign for governor of Georgia. My mother, Patricia, was the terrifying apex predator of Atlanta's high society, a woman who measured human worth strictly by offshore bank accounts and exclusive country club invitations. Growing up in their sprawling, sterile Buckhead mansion, I was the invisible disappointment. I refused to play the political pawn. I refused to smile for the glossy campaign brochures. Instead, I left their toxic ecosystem entirely, building a ruthless, highly successful career as a corporate liquidator. I specialized in hostile takeovers, dismantling corrupt companies piece by piece. My family despised my independence. They poured all their toxic affection into my younger sister, Chloe, the undisputed golden child. Chloe was groomed for the spotlight, a vapid, entitled socialite who recently married Terrence. Terrence was a self-proclaimed cryptocurrency visionary, a man who spoke endlessly about decentralized finance and disruptive blockchain technology, but secretly functioned on borrowed money and rapidly failing investor confidence. The grand ballroom of the historic Biltmore estate was a flurry of chaotic activity, as florists arranged towering displays of white orchids. I stood near the center of the room, finalizing the seating chart with the event coordinator. My fiancé, Julian, was quietly speaking with the lighting technicians near the stage. My family hated Julian. They considered him a lowly, unambitious data analyst because he wore simple dark sweaters, drove an understated sedan, and refused to participate in their exhausting displays of wealth. They had no idea who the quiet man in the dark sweater truly was. My phone vibrated sharply in my pocket. The caller ID flashed my father's name. I answered, expecting a logistical complaint about the rehearsal dinner. Desmond did not bother with a greeting. "I am not walking you down the aisle tomorrow, Naya," Desmond stated, his voice echoing with the polished, authoritative cadence he usually reserved for press conferences. I stopped walking. "Excuse me?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. "Your sister is currently having a severe panic attack," Desmond continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "She feels your choice of the Biltmore estate is a deliberate, malicious attempt to overshadow her own wedding from last year. Patricia and I will not tolerate this selfish behavior. You have always tried to ruin things for Chloe." I stared at the intricate gold molding on the ceiling. "The Biltmore has been booked for 2 years, Desmond. This has nothing to do with Chloe's fragile ego." Before he could respond, I heard a sharp scuffle over the line. Patricia snatched the receiver. "You have always been violently jealous of your sister," she snapped, her voice sharp as glass. "Chloe married a visionary. Terrence is building a digital empire. You are settling for a quiet little IT worker who probably had to take out a personal loan just to afford the catering deposit. Walk yourself down the aisle. Do not expect us to cater to your dramatic tantrums." "Tomorrow is my wedding day," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. "Are you truly issuing an ultimatum right now?" Patricia scoffed. "If you want your father to hold your hand tomorrow, you need to prove your loyalty to this family. You need to sign over the deed to the undeveloped commercial acreage in Midtown." I tightened my grip on the phone. The Midtown acreage was a prime, highly coveted piece of real estate my late grandfather left exclusively to me. It sat directly adjacent to the site of the new city stadium. I had plans to develop it into a massive commercial hub. Why would I give Chloe that land? "Because Terrence needs it," Patricia replied, speaking as if I were a slow, particularly stubborn child. "His cryptocurrency firm is expanding. He needs a tangible, high-value physical asset to secure a massive bridge loan from his creditors. It is the least you can do, considering you abandoned this family years ago. Sign the deed over by tonight. If you comply, your father will walk you down the aisle." If you refuse, you can walk yourself down that long aisle completely alone in front of 600 elite guests. We will sit in the front row and watch you humiliate yourself." The silence stretched between us. They did not view me as a daughter. They viewed me as an untapped asset, a convenient financial lifeline to bail out the golden child's failing husband. They were willing to hold my wedding day hostage to steal my grandfather's legacy. "I understand," I said quietly, devoid of any pleading or sorrow. "I will see you tomorrow." I ended the call. Julian stepped out from the shadows of the archway. He had heard the entire exchange. He walked over and gently wrapped his arms around my waist. "Are you all right?" His deep voice grounded me instantly. I turned to face him. My family believed Julian was a mid-level tech employee. They did not know he was the founder and sole owner of Obsidian Sovereign Wealth, a private global intelligence and investment firm that managed the hidden assets of entire nations. "They want the Midtown acreage," I told him, my eyes locking onto his. "They are threatening a public boycott of the wedding, to force me to hand it over to Terrence." Julian's eyes darkened, a dangerous predatory energy radiating from him. "What do you want to do?" I felt a cold, familiar rush of adrenaline. "Initiate the final protocol, Julian," I said softly. "Burn their entire empire to the ground." The morning of the wedding arrived with crisp, clear skies. I sat in the luxurious bridal suite of the Biltmore, adjusting the intricate lace sleeves of my gown. The heavy mahogany doors suddenly burst open with a resounding crash. Chloe marched into the room. She was not wearing the elegant navy bridesmaid dress we had agreed upon. Instead, she was draped in a massive, floor-length white evening gown, entirely encrusted with shimmering crystals. It featured a sweeping cathedral train. She wore a literal wedding dress to my wedding. The sheer audacity of her outfit was a physical manifestation of her lifelong obsession to steal my spotlight. Patricia followed right behind her, her face pulled into a tight, disapproving sneer, searching the room for something to criticize. Terrence brought up the rear, walking with the unearned swagger of a man who believed his digital coins made him a god. He bypassed the customary greetings, marching straight to my glass vanity. He slammed a thick legal document onto the delicate surface. "Sign it, Nia," Terrence sneered, crossing his arms over his expensive suit. "My firm is on the verge of $1 billion valuation. I do not have time for your petty sibling rivalry. Your little tech support fiancé works for a company my investors could buy and sell before lunch. If you do not sign over that Midtown property right this second, I will personally make sure Julian is blacklisted from the entire tech industry." I looked down at the predatory transfer deed, then up at Terrence's smug face. He truly believed he held the power. He had no idea that the venture capital creditors currently breathing down his neck were quietly owned by the man he just casually insulted. "You hear him, Nia?" Chloe chimed in, stepping forward so the morning light caught the glittering crystals on her white dress. "Stop being so selfish. Terrence needs that property today. Your little commercial hub project is a waste of prime real estate. You owe us this." I slowly stood up, my own magnificent gown pooling elegantly around my feet. I picked up the thick stack of legal papers. I looked Terrence dead in the eye. I did not blink. With one swift, deliberate motion, I gripped the top of the heavy document and ripped the entire stack firmly in half. The sharp sound of tearing paper echoed through the tense room like a gunshot. I dropped the shredded pieces onto the floor, letting them flutter onto Terrence's expensive shoes. "My grandfather left that land to me because he knew I would build something real," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "I am not handing it over to fund your rapidly collapsing crypto Ponzi scheme. Terrence, your digital coins are crashing, you are completely broke, now get out of my suite." Patricia surged forward, her face twisting into a mask of pure rage. "You arrogant, ugly liquidator," she screamed. "You bring nothing but shame to this proud family. Keep your worthless dirt. But hear me now. Your father is sitting in the sanctuary right now. He will not stand by you. We will watch you walk down that massive aisle alone. We will let 600 of Atlanta's most elite guests see exactly what you are. A miserable, isolated failure." She grabbed Chloe's arm aggressively, dragging her toward the door. "Come along, let us take our seats. Let the whole city see the true face of the Washington family outcast. Terrence shot me one last venomous glare. You just ruined your fiancé's life, he spat. Turning on his heel, the heavy doors slammed shut behind them. I took a deep, fortifying breath, smoothing the delicate front of my gown. I picked up my cascading bouquet of white orchids. I walked toward the mirror one last time. I was ready for war. I stepped out of the suite and made my way down the grand marble hallway toward the sanctuary. I could hear the faint melodic murmur of hundreds of voices echoing from behind the massive oak doors. The elite of Atlanta had gathered, expecting a traditional high society wedding. They were fully expecting State Senator Desmond Washington to proudly present his daughter. They had no idea they were about to witness a brutal, calculated execution. A frantic wedding coordinator gripped her clipboard tightly, rushing up to me. Miss Washington, your father is not in the staging area. We are ready to begin the processional. What should we do? Open the doors, I commanded softly. The traditional wedding march began to play, the swelling notes of the organ filling the heavy air. The massive oak doors of the sanctuary slowly swung open, revealing a breathtaking space filled with hundreds of people. The sunlight caught the tall stained glass windows, casting vibrant colors across the aisles. The entire congregation stood up and turned toward me. I looked straight ahead, my face an unreadable mask. Sitting comfortably in the very first pew was Desmond. He was dressed in a sharp tuxedo, his arms crossed over his chest. He was smirking. It was a cruel, triumphant smirk. He was eagerly waiting for me to step into the light alone. He was eagerly waiting for my public, devastating humiliation. Patricia sat right next to him, her head held high, while Chloe stood nearby in her absurd white gown, looking positively gleeful. I took my first confident step forward into the massive room. I did not walk alone. Suddenly the arrogant smirk vanished from Desmond's face. All the color drained rapidly from his cheeks, his confident posture collapsed, and his eyes widened in sheer terror. He gripped the wooden pew in front of him, his knuckles turning pure white as he leaped to his feet in horror. He was staring directly at the person who had just stepped out of the shadows to firmly link arms with me. The powerful ghost he had buried 20 years ago had just walked into the room. My arm was firmly looped through the arm of a man the Washington family had not spoken of in 2 decades. Silas Washington. He was my father's older brother according to the carefully curated family lie. Silas was a disgraced corporate traitor who had fled the country 20 years ago after allegedly selling sensitive defense contracts to foreign adversaries. My parents used his name as a cautionary tale, a dark stain on their pristine political image. They told everyone who would listen that Silas was a monster who brought endless shame to the Washington legacy. But the man walking beside me was very much alive, and he was no monster. Silas was a towering figure of terrifying power. He was impeccably dressed in a bespoke suit that draped perfectly across his broad shoulders, exuding a quiet lethality. His silver hair was meticulously groomed and his dark eyes swept over the crowded sanctuary with the cold, calculating precision of a seasoned commander inspecting a battlefield. As we began our slow descent down the long aisle, the reaction from the elite guests was instantaneous and electric. This was a visceral, physical reaction to the sheer magnitude of power entering the room. I watched closely as the political elite of Atlanta realized exactly who was walking beside me. The shockwaves rippled through the pews. The current governor of Georgia, sitting in the third row, immediately stood up, buttoned his suit jacket, and bowed his head respectfully. 2 federal judges quickly followed suit, scrambling to their feet and averting their eyes as Silas passed by them. Prominent defense contractors and the city's top executives all stood at attention, creating a domino effect of submission down the aisle. They were not standing for me, the bride. They were standing in deep, unwavering respect for Silas Washington. The supposed traitor had not fled into obscurity. He had crossed the Atlantic, founded a massive private military contractor based in Geneva, and now controlled global security forces that dwarfed national armies. He did not acknowledge the crowd with words. A slight, almost imperceptible nod of his head sent a ripple of complete submission through the powerful audience. It was a silent display of dominance that proved exactly who really commanded true global influence. Desmond was visibly unraveling in real time. The pasty, sweating panic on his face was undeniable. He looked wildly around the enormous room, seeing his crucial political donors and elite society friends bowing in reverence to the older brother he had publicly buried and disgraced. Desmond simply could not handle the loss of control. He scrambled clumsily out of his front row pew, rushing directly into the center of the main aisle, physically blocking our path toward the altar. His face was purple with outrage, a stark contrast to his polished senatorial demeanor. "Security," Desmond bellowed, his voice cracking with a mixture of unfiltered rage and sheer terror. He waved his arms frantically toward the back of the massive sanctuary, ignoring the shocked gasps of his friends. "Get this traitor out of here right now. Someone call the police immediately." He turned his wild, desperate eyes to me, completely ignoring the fact that it was my wedding day. "Nia, how dare you drag this corporate spy into a room full of my most important political donors? Are you insane? You are ruining my gubernatorial campaign. Get away from him this instant." The romantic music from the professional string quartet screeched to a halting, awkward stop. A suffocating silence fell over the massive church. Every eye in the room was glued to the confrontation unfolding in the center aisle. Patricia sat rigidly in her seat, clutching her pearl necklace so tightly her knuckles were white, unable to process the social disaster happening in front of her. Chloe clutched Terrence's arm, her highly inappropriate crystal-beaded white dress, suddenly looking incredibly foolish against the backdrop of real, terrifying power. Terrence looked like he wanted to run for the nearest exit. Silas did not flinch, he did not raise his voice, he did not look angry, he simply looked down at his sweating, panicking younger brother with the mild distaste one might reserve for a cockroach crawling on a shoe. Silas let his gaze slowly sweep over the surrounding politicians, letting the agonizing silence amplify his unquestionable authority. The politicians actively looked away, terrified to meet his eye. Finally, Silas brought his dark, intense eyes back to Desmond. "Step aside, Desmond," Silas commanded. His voice was smooth, deep, and resonated with a dangerous, quiet authority that echoed perfectly off the vaulted cathedral ceilings. "You are stepping on my niece's train." Desmond's face flushed a violent crimson. He took an aggressive step forward, pointing a shaking, accusatory finger at Silas. "She is my daughter," Desmond stammered, spittle flying from his trembling lips. "You have no right to be here. You have no right to claim her. I am her father. You are a dead man." I did not let Silas answer that ridiculous claim. I stepped slightly forward, feeling the solid, immovable support of my uncle standing firmly beside me. I looked at the man who had tormented me for 3 decades. My voice was crystal clear, projected perfectly into the dead silent church so that every single one of Desmond's precious donors could hear the truth. "You disowned me when I was 18 years old, Desmond," I said, my words striking like precise, calculated blows. "You threw me out of your massive Buckhead mansion because I refused to launder money through your fake charity foundations. You literally left me on the street with nothing. You told me I was a permanent disgrace to your perfect political image. You let me starve while you happily bought Chloe another luxury sports car." Desmond opened his mouth to argue loudly, his face twisting with denial, but I cut him off. "Silas found me," I continued, looking directly into Desmond's panicked, darting eyes. "When you told the entire world he was a fugitive, he was quietly rebuilding a massive empire from the shadows in Europe. And he used that very empire to save me. Silas paid for my corporate liquidation licenses when I could not afford to eat. He mentored me for years. He funded my very first hostile takeover firm when no bank in this city would even look at an exiled daughter. He taught me how to conquer the cutthroat business world you hold so dear. He has been more of a loving, supportive father to me in the last decade than you ever were in my entire life. He earned the right to walk me down this aisle today. You lost that right a very long time ago." Frantic whispers immediately broke out among the elite guests. Society reporters pulled out their phones, frantically typing notes and sending messages to their editors. Desmond's carefully constructed narrative of being a devoted family man, and a senator of unshakable integrity was crumbling into dust right in front of his eyes. The wealthy donors he had aggressively courted for his gubernatorial run exchanged deeply concerned, suspicious glances. The foundation of his life was cracking. Desmond realized he was rapidly losing the crowd. Panic overtook any remaining shred of his political restraint. He lunged forward, reaching out with a sweaty, desperate hand to aggressively grab my arm, intent on physically dragging me away from Silas and out a side door to hide his public shame. "You are coming with me right now," he growled, his fingers inches from my bare skin. Silas did not even break a sweat. He did not move to physically block his brother. He simply raised his free right hand and snapped his fingers once. The sharp cracking sound cut through the murmuring crowd. Instantly, two massive, heavily muscled security guards in immaculate black suits stepped smoothly out from the shadows of the side columns. They moved with terrifying speed, silence, and absolute precision. Before Desmond could lay a single finger on my wedding dress, the guards intercepted him. They grabbed him firmly by both arms, their grips like unyielding steel vises, stopping his forward momentum dead in its tracks. Desmond yelped in pure shock as the imposing guards easily forced him backward. They pushed him efficiently until the backs of his knees hit the wooden front pew. They forced him to sit down hard, right next to a completely petrified Patricia. The guards did not leave his side. They stood perfectly still at the edge of the pew, their massive frames effectively blocking Desmond from moving a single inch. Silas looked down at his younger brother, his expression a void of mercy or familial warmth. He leaned forward slightly, his presence dominating the space. "Sit down and be quiet like a good guest, little brother," Silas commanded, his voice dripping with icy, undeniable authority, "or I will have you physically removed from my niece's property." With that final crushing statement, Silas gently patted my arm and we resumed our slow, elegant walk down the aisle. The music slowly started up again, the professional musicians clearly too terrified to do anything else but play. Julian was waiting for me at the altar, looking incredibly handsome, a knowing, profoundly proud smile playing on his lips. As Silas handed me over to the man I loved, I glanced back over my shoulder one last time to take in the masterpiece of chaos we had just created. The entire Washington family was huddled closely together in the front row, completely pinned in by Silas's elite security team. Desmond was shaking uncontrollably with a potent mixture of raw, impotent rage and absolute undeniable fear. Patricia was weeping silently, her expensive makeup running as her precious social standing evaporated before her very eyes. Chloe looked down at her ridiculous, over-the-top white dress, suddenly realizing she was not the beautiful star of the show, but merely a pathetic clown in a terrifying circus she could no longer control. The wedding proceeded flawlessly, transitioning into a beautiful, triumphant celebration of love, resilience, and unyielding power. I stood at the altar, holding Julian's hands, listening to the officiant's words, but my peripheral vision remained locked on the front row. The Washington family was utterly paralyzed. Desmond's chest heaved with every shallow breath, his eyes darting frantically toward the towering security guards who flanked his pew like stone gargoyles. He was trapped in a prison of his own public humiliation. We exchanged our vows in the warm glow of the stained glass, surrounded by the elite who now knew exactly where the true power of Atlanta resided, leaving the toxic remnants of my past suffocating silently in our wake. The transition from the sanctuary to the grand ballroom of the Biltmore estate was an exercise in high society tension and unspoken chaos. Massive tiered crystal chandeliers cast a brilliant sparkling light over the 600 elite guests, who mingled with a newfound, buzzing, almost frantic energy. Waitstaff in crisp, tailored black uniforms circulated flawlessly through the crowd, balancing heavy silver trays loaded with imported champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvre. Nobody paid any attention to the food or the drinks. The entire room was captivated by the dramatic, unprecedented shift in power they had just witnessed. Mayors, state senators, and wealthy commercial developers stood in tight, hushed clusters, casting nervous, calculating glances toward the corner of the room. There, Silas Washington stood near a towering arrangement of white roses. My uncle nursed a glass of neat bourbon, looking completely at ease while his private security detail hovered discreetly in the shadows, their eyes scanning the room. He did not need to mingle or introduce himself. The most powerful people in Atlanta were slowly, respectfully lining up just for the rare privilege of shaking his hand and welcoming him back from exile. On the exact opposite side of the sprawling ballroom, my parents were actively drowning in their ruined reputations. Desmond stood stiffly near a massive, intricately carved ice sculpture. His face was a dangerous shade of red. He was desperately trying to laugh off the ceremony's events to a group of skeptical, immensely wealthy political donors, attempting to frame the horrifying confrontation as a simple family misunderstanding. He failed miserably. His donors backed away, their eyes filled with severe doubt about his integrity and his gubernatorial campaign. Patricia was doing everything in her power to maintain her pristine, untouchable socialite facade. She frantically waved down the hired society photographers, aggressively trying to orchestrate candid shots of herself looking joyful, elegant, and unbothered by the scandal. The cameras were not focused on her anymore. The lenses were pointed directly at Julian and me. We sat together at the beautifully decorated sweetheart table on the elevated main stage, quietly observing the shifting dynamics of the room. Julian held my hand underneath the silk tablecloth, his thumb tracing soothing, rhythmic circles against my palm. We won the first major battle of the day, but the war was far from over. From my vantage point, I could clearly see the raw, unfiltered rage radiating off my younger sister. Chloe was seething. She stood near the polished edge of the massive dance floor in her ridiculous, crystal-beaded white evening gown, gripping a delicate champagne flute so tightly, I genuinely thought the glass might shatter and slice open her hand. Her face twisted into an ugly, fiercely jealous scowl. She fully expected this day to be the ultimate stage for my public humiliation. She expected to watch me walk down that long aisle alone, a pitiful, broken outcast, begging for their love. Instead, my entrance had utterly eclipsed her existence. Silas Washington's dramatic, terrifying return relegated her to insignificance in front of the city's elite. For a golden child who thrived exclusively on constant adoration and validation, being ignored was a fate far worse than death. I watched closely as Chloe finally snapped, turning her venomous, hateful glare directly toward our table. She slammed her half-empty glass recklessly onto a passing waiter's tray, nearly knocking it over, and marched purposefully toward the elevated DJ booth. She leaned aggressively over the expensive audio equipment, angrily snapping her manicured fingers right in the DJ's face, and pointing sharply to the main speakers. The smooth, lively jazz music filling the ballroom abruptly cut off with a harsh grating, loud screech. The sudden deafening silence instantly drew the undivided attention of all 600 guests. Heads turned in unison, conversations halted mid-sentence, the room went dead silent, the heavy anticipation hanging thick in the air. Chloe did not wait for an invitation or an introduction. She strutted aggressively up the side steps of the main stage, the heavy cathedral train of her inappropriate white gown dragging loudly across the polished wood floor. She walked directly up to one of my stunned, bewildered groomsmen, snatched the wireless microphone right out of his hand with a violent jerk, and moved to the exact center of the stage. She stood there bathing in the sudden, concentrated attention, a wide, deeply fake, forced smile plastered across her face. Patricia instantly stopped harassing the terrified waiters and began clapping loudly, looking around frantically to ensure the society photographers were raising their cameras to capture her favorite perfect daughter in the spotlight. "I want to propose a toast," Chloe announced loudly, her shrill, piercing voice echoing sharply off the ballroom walls. She held her free hand high up in the air, demanding absolute, unwavering focus from the elite crowd. Not just to the newlyweds, but to the future, to real success, to true family legacy, and to the things that actually matter. She paused for a long, theatrical moment, letting her eyes sweep over the crowd, intentionally avoiding my gaze. She desperately wanted this to be a flawless performance, a moment that would assert her dominance over me once and for all. Terrence and I have some exciting news of our own to share with all of you wonderful people tonight, Chloe continued, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet artificial enthusiasm. We are officially expecting a baby, the bank's family legacy is growing, and we are just so overjoyed. A smattering of polite, confused applause broke out among the guests. Hijacking a wedding reception to announce a pregnancy was a massive, unforgivable breach of high society etiquette. Chloe was far too desperate for the spotlight to care about manners. She soaked up the scattered, hesitant clapping, her smile growing wider, sharper, and vastly more arrogant. And, to properly celebrate our rapidly growing family, she announced, raising her voice even louder, to ensure the photographers and journalists caught every single syllable, Terrence and I just closed on a massive $10 million estate in the heart of Buckhead. It is a stunning, breathtaking historic property. It is exactly the kind of beautiful, sprawling home a true legacy family deserves to raise their children in. She finally turned her head to look directly at me. Her eyes were hard, malicious, and filled with a bitter, toxic triumph. She went for the kill, aiming to publicly shame me and my husband in front of the very people I did business with every single day. It is honestly such a crying shame that Naya and Julian have to rent a venue like this just to pretend they have our kind of lifestyle for one single, fleeting night, Chloe mocked, her voice laced with heavy, unmistakable condescension. But we understand, we really do. Not everyone comes from real money, not everyone can afford a $10 million home in Buckhead. But Terrence and I love charity, and we are just so happy we could be here to support my sister's little rented fantasy. Patricia clapped even louder, a smug, satisfied, vicious grin spreading across her face. Desmond puffed out his chest in the front row, looking profoundly relieved that the attention finally shifted back to his golden daughter and her supposed immense wealth. The crowd, however, remained uncomfortably silent. The blatant, aggressive disrespect was jarring, even for Atlanta's famously cutthroat social circles. They looked to the sweetheart table, waiting with bated breath to see exactly how the outcast daughter would handle this spectacular, deeply public insult. I did not yell, I did not cry, I did not even frown. I simply stood up gracefully, smoothing the front of my heavy silk gown, and walked calmly and deliberately toward my younger sister. My steps were measured, entirely unhurried, and devoid of panic. I reached out and smoothly, effortlessly took the microphone directly from Chloe's hand before she could register my movement. She blinked in rapid surprise, taking a slight uncertain step back as I claimed the absolute center of the stage. I looked out at the massive sea of faces, 600 powerful, influential people watching my every move. I smiled. It was a genuine, warm, terrifyingly confident smile that sent a visible shiver down Patricia's spine. "Thank you, Chloe, for that passionate, informative toast," I said smoothly, my voice projecting perfectly through the state-of-the-art sound system, wrapping around the room like velvet. "And congratulations on your pregnancy, however, since we are standing up here sharing major milestones and financial victories with all of our esteemed guests tonight. I feel compelled to correct a very slight but very important inaccuracy in your lovely speech." Chloe narrowed her eyes, crossing her arms defensively over the sparkling bodice of her white dress. "There was no inaccuracy," she snapped quietly, just loud enough for the very front row of guests to hear. I ignored her entirely, keeping my eyes fixed firmly on the massive crowd, making sure Desmond and Patricia watched me intently. "Julian and I did not rent the Biltmore estate for our wedding," I stated clearly and proudly. I raised my left hand high and snapped my fingers sharply at the lead AV technician, standing in the elevated control booth at the back of the room. He nodded his head immediately. The heavy dark velvet curtains behind the stage swiftly and silently parted, revealing 3 massive high-definition projector screens. The screens flared to life in perfect, coordinated unison. A gigantic, crystal-clear image of a detailed, legally binding commercial property deed flashed onto the massive displays. The text was large enough for the senators, standing all the way in the back row, to read clearly. "I bought this entire estate last November," I announced, my voice cutting through the rising, shocked murmurs of the crowd like a precision blade. "I acquired the Biltmore estate, the main house, the ballrooms, and its surrounding 50 acres of prime land, through my corporate liquidation firm, Vanguard Equity. The transaction was finalized, processed, and fully paid in cash. A collective, loud, audible gasp rippled through the ballroom. The Biltmore estate was one of the most coveted, historically significant, and heavily guarded pieces of real estate in the entire state of Georgia. It was a crown jewel that old money families aggressively tried to purchase for decades. And I, the discarded outcast daughter of the Washington family, owned it unequivocally. I turned slowly to face my younger sister, Chloe's jaw literally dropped wide open, her face rapidly drained of all color, perfectly matching the ridiculous white gown she wore. Her arms fell limply to her sides as she stared up at the massive, undeniable legal deed projected behind me. "Which means, Chloe," I said, my voice dropping to a cool, conversational tone that carried perfectly through the crisp microphone, "you are currently standing on my stage. You are drinking my expensive champagne, and you are desperately trying to show off in my house." The silence that followed was absolute and crushing. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating silence that occurs when an entire worldview violently shatters into a million pieces. Patricia's smug, satisfied grin vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer panicked horror. She looked wildly around the enormous room, realizing with crushing dread that the society photographers indeed captured every second of the brutal exchange. They captured her golden daughter bragging pathetically about a mortgaged house, while standing in a multi-million-dollar historical estate owned entirely by the daughter she aggressively disowned. The ultimate social humiliation she meticulously planned for me completely and utterly backfired, consuming her and her favorite child in a raging, inescapable fire of public embarrassment. Chloe looked like she was about to be physically sick right there on the polished floor. Her wide, terrified eyes darted frantically from me to the massive projector screens and back again. She opened her mouth to speak, to try and salvage some tiny shred of her dignity, but no sound came out. She was completely, utterly, and publicly defeated. But the brutal confrontation was not over. Terrence Banks, humiliated by his wife's devastating public takedown, could not handle the blow to his fragile, inflated ego. His face flushed a dark, dangerously angry purple, as he forcefully shoved his way past a group of powerful state representatives and stormed violently toward the main stage. He marched heavily up the wooden stairs, his fists clenched tightly at his sides, ignoring the shocked, appalled stares of the elite guests watching his meltdown. "You think you are something special, because you bought a venue?" Terrence yelled, pointing an aggressive, shaking finger directly at my face. He did not care about the microphone. He projected his voice with pure, unfiltered, desperate rage. "You think buying a piece of commercial property makes you better than us? You have no class. You have no pedigree. I am building a decentralized digital empire. We are the future of finance. You and your pathetic, quiet little IT guy husband could never even begin to understand what real wealth and true power actually look like." Before Terrence could take another aggressive step toward me, a calm, steady hand reached out and smoothly took the microphone from my grasp. Julian, my quiet, unassuming IT guy, stepped smoothly and confidently in front of me, placing his solid frame directly between me and Terrence's aggressive, threatening advance. Julian was not wearing an angry scowl. His handsome face was a mask of absolute chilling, terrifying tranquility. In his left hand, he held a sleek black digital tablet he quietly retrieved from our sweetheart table. He looked Terrence up and down, his dark eyes scanning the furious, red-faced man with the clinical, detached precision of a surgeon examining a terminal, hopeless patient. Julian raised the microphone slowly to his lips, his deep voice resonating through the massive ballroom with a dark, commanding power that instantly silenced the entire shocked crowd. "Let us talk about your decentralized digital empire, Terrence." Julian's voice was remarkably level, utterly devoid of the frantic, spitting anger that currently consumed Terrence. My husband stood tall and perfectly grounded, projecting an effortless, quiet authority that required no shouting to command the room. Terrence froze in his tracks, his fists still clenched tightly at his sides, his chest heaving under his tailored jacket. He stared up at the stage, looking at Julian as if a piece of the ballroom furniture had just spoken to him. "You threatened my livelihood earlier today in the bridal suite, Terrence." Julian continued. His tone was smooth and conversational, yet it carried with crystal clarity across the dead silent ballroom. You proudly boasted that your investors could buy and sell my employer before lunch. You swore that you could make a few phone calls and have me fired, blacklisted, and entirely destitute before I even had the chance to cut my own wedding cake. Terence sneered, thrusting his chin forward, though a brief flicker of uncertainty flashed in his eyes. I meant every word, you nobody. You are just a low-level tech support drone. You fetch coffee and fix routers. Do not try to play big with me. Julian offered a faint, chilling smile. That is the fundamental problem with arrogance. Terence, it makes you intellectually lazy. You rely on assumptions instead of facts, and you did not do your research. I do not work in tech support. I am the founder, CEO, and sole majority shareholder of Obsidian Sovereign Wealth. A collective sharp intake of breath echoed through the Biltmore Estate ballroom. The name dropped like a physical heavy bomb into the center of high society. Obsidian Sovereign Wealth was not just a successful firm. It was a ruthless global titan. It was a private intelligence and investment firm that managed the hidden assets of entire nations. It controlled billions in assets and practically dictated the global financial weather. The whispers erupted immediately, sweeping through the crowd like wildfire. Mayors, senators, and powerful CEOs stared at Julian with sudden fearful reverence. The quiet IT guy was the apex predator of their world. Julian did not pause to let Terence process the shock. He tapped the screen of his sleek black tablet with one finger. Instantly, the massive projector screens behind the stage shifted. My property deed vanished, replaced by a series of complex redacted financial documents. Key figures and signatures, however, were highlighted in brilliant, damning red ink. Since Chloe insists on sharing financial milestones with our friends and family tonight, Julian said, pacing slowly and deliberately across the stage. Let us look at the mathematical reality of your digital empire. Your cryptocurrency firm is not the untouchable titan of industry you pretend it is. In fact, it is secretly bleeding out. You are $80 million in debt to private creditors, and you have been hiding it through creative accounting and offshore shell companies for over a year. Terence's face rapidly drained of all color. He took a stumbling step backward, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly as he stared at the undeniable proof of his ruin, projected in 50-foot-high letters. Last month, Julian continued, his voice echoing relentlessly. You were so desperate for liquidity that you put up every single remaining asset your firm possesses as collateral. You went to a shadow lender begging for a lifeline. Obsidian Sovereign Wealth quietly purchased that shadow lender 2 weeks ago. We approved a high-risk, predatory bridge loan to keep your firm out of federal bankruptcy court. And what did you do with those severely restricted borrowed funds, Terence? You used them to buy that $10 million mansion in Buckhead, just so you could keep up appearances. You financed a luxury lifestyle with money that belonged to me. Chloe let out a piercing, hysterical scream. She pushed her way to the very front of the stage, her hands clutching the sides of her face, pulling at her hair. Her heavy, crystal-encrusted white gown shimmered absurdly under the stage lights, no longer looking bridal, but rather like a tragic costume. You are lying, she shrieked, her voice cracking with pure, unadulterated panic. He is lying, Terence, tell them he is lying right now. You are a visionary, we belong in Buckhead. Julian ignored her frantic outburst. He kept his dark, unwavering gaze pinned strictly on Terence, who was now sweating profusely, his expensive suit suddenly looking too large for his shrinking frame. I reviewed the terms of the loan personally, Julian stated, his voice dropping to a deadly, icy timbre that commanded absolute silence. I made sure the terms were absolute and unforgiving. There was zero grace period for missed payments. You missed your very first payment this past Thursday. Terence shook his head violently, looking wildly around the room as if hoping someone, anyone, would save him from this public execution. No, the transfer was just delayed. It was a simple blockchain error. My developers assured me the smart contract would execute by Monday. There are no blockchain errors at Obsidian Sovereign Wealth, Julian corrected smoothly. crushing the final shred of Terrence's hope. As of 9 o'clock yesterday morning, my firm officially executed the default clause. We seized the collateral. We foreclosed on the $10 million Buckhead estate you just bragged about to these 600 guests. The locks were changed at noon today by my security teams. You are homeless, Terrence. The words hung in the air, absolute and devastating. Terrence Banks, the self-proclaimed visionary of Atlanta society, the man who spent his entire life looking down his nose at everyone he deemed beneath him, had just been publicly, surgically stripped of everything. Terrence finally snapped. The humiliation was too immense, the public evisceration too total for his fragile ego to process. With a guttural animalistic roar, he lunged violently forward. He charged up the wooden stairs of the stage, with his fists raised, aiming directly for Julian's head, completely blinded by rage. He never even made it halfway up the steps. Silas's security guards, who had been standing still like stone statues near the front pews, moved with terrifying, blinding speed. Before I could even gasp, two massive men in tailored black suits intercepted Terrence's charge. One guard grabbed him by the collar of his expensive jacket, while the other seamlessly swept his legs out from under him in one fluid, brutal motion. Terrence hit the polished wood of the stage floor with a sickening, heavy thud. The guards pinned him down instantly, a heavy knee pressing firmly into the center of Terrence's back, forcing his face flush against the hardwood. Terrence thrashed and screamed, spewing venomous profanities into the floorboards, but he was helplessly immobilized. The elite guests in the ballroom erupted into a frenzy of chaotic activity. The polite veneer of high society vanished in a single instant. Men and women in designer gowns and bespoke tuxedos rapidly pulled out their cell phones. I could hear the frantic, urgent whispers carrying over the commotion, as Atlanta's elite rushed to text their wealth managers, their stockbrokers, and their legal teams. They needed to sever any and all financial and social ties with Terrence Banks immediately before the rot spread to their own portfolios. His crypto firm was financially toxic. The grand illusion of his digital empire was entirely dead. Patricia, witnessing her precious, wealthy son-in-law face down on the floor, abandoned all pretense of elegance and society decorum. She let out a horrifying shriek, hiking up her expensive silk skirt and rushing frantically toward the stage. "Terrence, get your hands off him. You animals, unhand him right now," she wailed, throwing herself uselessly against the immovable wall of Silas's remaining security detail, who stepped up to block her path. She clawed at their arms, her perfectly styled hair falling into her face. Desmond stood frozen near the melting ice sculpture, his political career flashing before his eyes in a series of disastrous headlines. He saw his most crucial campaign donors, the men and women whose money he needed to become governor, watching this absolute circus. They were watching his family be exposed as frauds, bullies, and total financial failures. He knew he had to regain control, to assert the absolute dominance he wielded like a heavy club his entire life. Desmond puffed out his chest furiously, adjusting his tuxedo jacket, and marched toward the stage. His face twisted in a mask of desperate, red-faced authority. He pointed a shaking, furious finger at Julian and Silas. "This ends right now," Desmond bellowed, trying desperately to use his booming senatorial voice to quell the rising chaos of the ballroom. "I will not tolerate this criminal circus for another second. I will have every single one of you arrested for criminal slander and aggravated assault. I am a sitting state senator in this state. I am the next governor of the state of Georgia, and I will see you all entirely destroyed for this disrespect." Silas Washington stepped smoothly out from the shadows and onto the main stage. His bespoke tuxedo remained completely unwrinkled, his demeanor calm amidst the storm. He reached over and gently took the microphone from Julian's hand. Silas looked down at his younger brother, who was sweating, hyperventilating, and unhinged. Silas let out a low, deep, resonant chuckle that echoed powerfully through the state-of-the-art speakers, cutting through the panic and forcing the massive room into a terrified silence once more. "Are you sure about that, Desmond?" The question hung in the air, vibrating with lethal intent. Silas Washington did not need to shout. He did not need to puff out his chest or wave his arms frantically like his younger brother. True power was a whisper that silenced a room. Silas took one slow, deliberate step toward the center of the main stage, the polished wood gleaming under the crystal chandeliers. The entire grand ballroom went dead silent. You built your entire aggressively funded gubernatorial campaign on a remarkably fragile platform. Silas spoke smoothly, his voice a rich, dark baritone that commanded unwavering attention. Integrity and national security, that is your slogan, is it not? It is plastered on billboards across the state. It is printed on glossy flyers filling every mailbox. It is the pious lie you sell to the public every single day. Desmond swallowed hard, his throat working convulsively. The red flush of rage drained from his, leaving behind a sickly grayish pallor. He stood frozen next to the melting ice sculpture, completely incapable of formulating a coherent response. The elite political donors standing near him instinctively took another large step back, desperate to avoid the blast radius of his impending destruction. 20 years ago, you were an ambitious junior senator sitting on the Armed Services Committee. Silas continued, pacing slowly like a panther circling wounded prey. You needed a massive influx of untraceable cash to fund your political machine and secure your grip on this state. You did not just embezzle funds, Desmond. You sold classified, highly sensitive defense contracts to foreign shell companies. And when the federal investigators started closing in, you needed a scapegoat. You needed someone to take the fall for treason. Patricia let out a sharp, horrifying shriek, covering her mouth with both hands. The color completely washed out of her face, leaving her looking like a terrified ghost. She knew she had known the entire time. You created a fake paper trail, Silas roared, his voice unleashing the raw fury of 2 decades of exile. You forged my signature on the offshore bank transfers. You manipulated the intelligence reports. You framed your own flesh and blood for corporate espionage so you could steal millions in bribes and buy your corrupt way into the Senate. You thought I was destroyed. You told the world I fled like a coward. You buried me alive. Silas reached into his breast pocket and produced a sealed, heavy document sleeve. But I rebuilt, he declared. I started with nothing. I worked in the shadows where you put me. I amassed capital, forged ironclad alliances, and built an international private military empire that dwarfs your pathetic, small-minded imagination. And then, Desmond, I bought the European shadow bank that processed your treasonous bribes 20 years ago. Desmond froze entirely, his eyes widening, his breath catching in his throat. I brought in my own elite forensic accountants and dug through decades of archived, encrypted vaults, Silas revealed, his dark eyes burning with ultimate righteous victory. I found the original, unaltered physical ledgers, the ones you mistakenly thought were permanently erased in a convenient server wipe. Silas snapped his fingers. The AV technician in the booth immediately switched the displays. The redacted documents regarding Terrence Banks disappeared, replaced by high-resolution, brilliantly lit scans of decades-old offshore bank ledgers. The entire ballroom stared up at the glowing screens. The evidence was absolute and undeniable. The ledgers clearly showed the original bribery transfers, explicitly detailing millions of dollars moving directly into a private, hidden account, registered under Desmond Washington's name. At the bottom of the authorization forms, magnified 10 times its normal size, was Desmond's distinct, arrogant signature. "There's the unvarnished truth," Silas declared, his voice echoing fiercely over the gasping crowd. "There is your celebrated man of integrity. A thief, a traitor, and a pathetic coward who framed his own brother for his insatiable, sickening greed." Desmond collapsed heavily onto his knees, the harsh impact echoed sharply on the marble floor, but he did not seem to feel the physical pain. He stared blankly up at the giant screens, completely defeated, his mouth hanging open in a silent, agonizing scream of absolute ruin. The elite guests actively backed away from him as if he carried a highly contagious, deadly disease. He was no longer a respected senator or a future governor. He was an exposed traitor facing a life sentence in federal prison. 2 men in sharp, identical dark suits stepped into the brilliant light of the crystal chandeliers. They reached into their jacket pockets and produced small black leather wallets, flipping them open to reveal gleaming silver badges. Federal agents, I handed all the original ledgers and the irrefutable proof of the treasonous bribes over to the FBI weeks ago, Silas announced calmly. The trap is sprung. The federal agents bypassed Patricia entirely and marched straight down the center aisle. Desmond did not fight. The last ounce of his arrogant political bluster evaporated the second the cold steel of the handcuffs snapped securely around his wrists. The metallic click echoed sharply against the vaulted ceilings, cutting through the tense air like a gunshot. The senior agent leaned in close, reciting Desmond's Miranda rights. Chloe witnessed the entire scene unfold with wide, unblinking eyes. Her breath came in short, ragged gasps. She looked at her father, now reduced to a sweating, broken criminal in federal custody. Survival instinct, raw and incredibly selfish, took over. She stumbled backward, her expensive crystal-encrusted white gown catching awkwardly on the edge of a stage monitor. She scrambled to regain her balance, pointing a manicured, trembling finger directly at Patricia and Desmond. "I did not know anything," Chloe screamed, her voice a shrill wail that shattered the stunned silence. "They forced me. My parents forced me to hate Nia. They manipulated me my entire life." A collective murmur of disgust rippled through the elite crowd. Throwing your own parents to the wolves the very second federal agents entered the room was a level of cowardice that even Atlanta's most cutthroat socialites found appalling. Chloe pivoted sharply, turning her desperate, tear-filled eyes toward her husband, who was still grinding his teeth into the polished hardwood of the stage. "And Terrence lied to me about his money," Chloe shrieked, playing her ultimate trump card. "I am a victim here. He told me we were rich, he told me the crypto empire was real. I am pregnant. And I am a victim of all of these terrible, lying people." Terrence Banks stopped thrashing against the heavy weight of the security guard. He lifted his head just a few agonizing inches off the floor. His face was bruised and flushed with explosive fury. The humiliation of being pinned down was completely eclipsed by the sheer hatred he now felt for his own wife. "A victim?" Terrence spat, his voice a harsh growl that carried perfectly through the silent room. "You are the furthest thing from a victim, you greedy parasite. You maxed out 3 secret credit cards in my mother's name just to buy your fake designer bags. Chloe, every single Chanel purse you flaunted today, every Cartier bracelet you wore to the country club, it was all bought with stolen credit. You bled my family dry just to maintain your fake Instagram lifestyle." The society photographers immediately began snapping photos of Chloe's horrified, crumbling expression. The blinding flashes of light illuminated the panic on her face. Wearing fake designer bags bought with a stolen mother-in-law's credit card was the ultimate, unforgivable social sin. Chloe was officially a societal pariah. Patricia, witnessing the total annihilation of the luxurious, untouchable life she violently clung to, shifted instantly into pure selfish survival mode. She looked wildly around the room, desperately seeking out the familiar faces of her elite social circle. She locked eyes with Margaret Dubois, the undisputed gatekeeper of Atlanta's high society. Patricia reached out a trembling, desperate hand toward her. "Margaret, please," Patricia gasped, her voice shrill and breathless. "You know our family, this is an elaborate setup." Margaret Dubois did not flinch. She took a deliberate, highly visible step backward, physically pulling her silk dress out of Patricia's frantic reach. "Your membership to the Heritage Country Club is permanently revoked," Margaret stated coldly. "Do not ever attempt to contact me or my associates again." Patricia was alone. She turned her desperate eyes back toward the elevated main stage. Looking up at me, she practically crawled to the wooden steps, dropping heavily onto the bottom step, tears streaming down her ruined makeup. "Nia," Patricia whimpered, her voice cracking horribly. "Nia, my baby, please, you have to stop this. We are your blood, I am your mother." The heavy hypocrisy was physically revolting. I stood at the absolute edge of the stage, looking down at the woman who gave birth to me. The entire room went desolate. "You stood in my bridal suite, looked me directly in the eye on my wedding day, and demanded I hand over my legacy." I stated calmly, my voice resonating with cool, undeniable authority. "You tried to force me to sign away my grandfather's land to save the daughter you actually loved. you taught me that the real world operates on action-based consequences. Nia, please! Patricia screamed, her voice breaking into a shrill wail. I am your mother, now, I stated, delivering the absolute final verdict. It is your turn. Figure it out. I turned my back on my parents and looked directly at the head of my private security team. Escort them out, I ordered. All 4 of them, they are officially trespassing. The security guards moved with clinical efficiency. 2 massive guards hauled Terrence to his feet and marched him down the center aisle. The federal agents marched Desmond directly toward the heavy mahogany double doors. Patricia and Chloe were forcibly intercepted by event security. Chloe was sobbing hysterically as a guard gripped her firmly by the arm, forcing her to walk. They were marched toward the exit, their expensive designer heels dragging loudly across the polished marble floors. The heavy mahogany doors slammed shut behind them with a resounding, definitive thud. The physical removal of the Washington family left a heavy, vibrating silence in its wake. Julian stepped forward and wrapped his arm around my waist, pulling me close. He leaned down and pressed a soft, lingering kiss to my forehead. Julian reached out and took the microphone from my hand. He looked out over the sea of stunned socialites, politicians, and business moguls. I apologize for the interruption, ladies and gentlemen, Julian said smoothly, his rich, confident voice instantly grounding the chaotic energy in the room. But as my beautiful wife has just demonstrated, we do not tolerate bad investments. Now, please enjoy the champagne, and let us celebrate the actual family we have built tonight. The tension in the room shattered, the ballroom erupted into thunderous, deafening applause. It was a roar of genuine approval and awe. We had achieved the ultimate sweet revenge. It was not enacted through petty squabbles, it was absolute, undeniable success. I was living a life of profound purpose, untouchable by the people who once tried to destroy me.